Welcome to our webinar on Creativity at the Core, Module 2, Section 2. I'm Keith Weifels with the Music Center.
And I'm Susan Cambic-Tracy.
In this section, we're going to become familiar with and/or review the Visual and Performing Arts Framework and the Common Core English Language Arts Standards. Now, Susan, you have some experience with the Visual and Performing Arts Framework. What's one big idea that stands out to you when you think of or look at the framework?
Well, there's a brilliant idea. And the idea, and I was part of watching this in the beginning and being part of it in the middle and then final parts, is that all of the art forms came to agreement on the 5 standards and that they decided that these would be the strands that really set the foundation for all the visual and performing arts standards. That was such a big idea, and it took years and years for them to focus on what was really valid, what was really true for all art forms, and what would make the teaching and the learning of it be able to be codified and measured. Now let's just take a look at what these 5 strands are. The first one, artistic perception, really sets the foundational stage for the art form. So it's really about processing and analyzing and responding to a variety of sensory information, but using the language of each art form and the skills required. So you're really developing a foundation that gives you access, and you have a toolbox of sorts with skills unique to each art form. Creative expression is pretty, I think, self-explanatory, but it gives you a chance to take what you've learned, use the skills that you have, and make meaning for yourself, as well as appreciate and see the variety of choices and other expression that others have without judgment, but really this inclusive kind of group of creators that you are learning and working with. Strand 3 is about historical and cultural context, giving it a setting, giving it a meaning, showing an art form that you might be studying and what its reference was at the historical time when it came about or was created. So whether it's a dance like the Charleston, or whether it is a particular work of art like Guernica, that really talks about war. It all has more meaning if seen in the setting of history. And then also the cultural context. We have universal experiences as human beings, but the way we express them, the style, the traditions, the kind of values, those are all the things that we need to understand to fully appreciate and compare and contrast. Then we have aesthetic valuing, which is really the critical thinking, the making judgments, the discussion, the compare and contrast, the finding evidence to back up our ideas like a critic would do, learning from that and pulling those ideas out so your next work can be better informed. And then finally, the piece that is really about integrated arts is the connections, relationships, and applications that you have that connect all subjects in life. And they're the concepts. I mentioned earlier that space is one of the elements of dance. Well, when I made connections to things that teachers wanted me to teach through dance, I used the ideas in space, in the element of time and rhythm, in the element of energy and how it was used, and matter, the shape and the form of the body and how it is used to express things. So I could always find a connection with anything that people asked me to teach through dance. And that's what Component 5 is about.
Now, if you flip to the back of the VAPA framework to the appendices, you'll find this tool called the Arts Education Program Implementation Continuum. And in this continuum, you'll find a list of different criteria for implementing the framework, such as the framework itself, instruction, assessment, professional development, funding, resources. And then you'll find 3 different levels how to grade yourself on your implementation, the foundational level, the building level, and the best practices level. And Susan, you also worked with this continuum with VAPA, didn't you?
Yes, I did. In fact, I was chair of the California Alliance for Arts Education, and it was during my terms in office that we went to the Kennedy Center and with all the other states, by the way, and all their arts councils and their alliances, and we were given an opportunity to see this document when it was first formed and to apply it and to understand it, and then the responsibility of taking it back to our state and sharing it on a wider level. So we picked some model schools and districts and we helped assist them to understand this as a tool. And we found that it was so helpful in first identifying where you were already at. Were you at the foundational level? And what were the needed pieces that you needed to put into place in order to move forward? And then finally, when you had the next level built, your goal was best practices. We wanted to have a program that was consistent throughout the districts and that was at a high level and a level that really met the standards of the framework as well. So yes, this was pretty exciting to be part of that.
Susan, what advantages do you think there might be to using the VAPA framework in designing lessons or curriculum?
Well, there's consistency. And you've had this group of experts in every art form, all the arts teachers, and we had regular classroom teachers, and you had artists as well, professors, you had people at all levels identifying what the critical knowledge base of every art form was, and then organizing it and sorting through it and sequencing it, codifying it so it could be taught. And I know in dance, with the other dance people, because I worked on the standards and the framework, we lay these out in an auditorium and we made sure that everything we started at kindergarten had a sequence and built and got more complex, and everything was interrelated to everything else, like a beautiful weaving. So that by the time you started simply in kindergarten and you finally got through all those grade levels in proficient or advanced at high school, you had all the pieces needed to give people a tremendous background and ability to keep growing once they hit university or just in their own lives.
Now, what kinds of challenges might prevent you from designing lessons with VAPA?
I see two big challenges. The first challenge is that if I'm a fifth grade teacher, say,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to meet the fifth grade standards,
Mm-hmm.
but the kids I have as my students haven't had any arts education at all, I have to in some way go back and revisit the earlier standards in order to build the beginning stages for my students to understand and grow from. So there's that little bit of catching up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is that as a teacher, I might want to do this, but I don't have necessarily any experience doing it. So I need to see good modeling. I need to have really authentic, well-crafted professional development. And I think one of the big things is collaborating with people that have a little more experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in some grade levels I've seen where one person will be more the expert on visual arts, one on music, one on dance, one on theater. And they work together so that all of their students have a richer experience in all four art forms. Or they may even trade classes so that they can build on their strengths and combine their strengths.
Yeah, it's amazing what comes out of teacher collaboration.
Yes.
One of these other ideas that comes at the intersection of VAPA and Common Core is that the arts are texts. We talk about literacy a lot in education these days, and while we're doing that, we need to think more broadly about what students read.
Well, works of art can also be read. I'm putting that in quotes because it may
Mm-hmm.
not be words, although in a play it could be words, but it's really a different form of reading, different ways of communicating ideas and understanding those ideas, so that works of art can and indeed should be read in a very similar way to a poem by Shakespeare or a speech by Winston Churchill. It is something that is information and in a form that has usually ideas that can be communicated and should be pulled apart, discussed, find evidence to support different points of view on it, and just like you would in an English class.
Now, a very effective way to go about this is to prepare well-crafted prompts prior to engaging your students with art as text. And some of these prompts are already out there, such as some of the prompts with visual thinking strategies. And Susan, I know you are actually very well practiced with visual thinking strategies as well.
Yes, I was fortunate enough to receive 2 levels of training in visual thinking strategies. And I think it's very important to point out that in this particular way of discussing a work of art, you do not begin by giving information about the work of art. You don't tell the name of the work or when it was, historically, culturally. You don't say who the artist was. You actually invite people to enter in and start seeing with more vivid eyes and
Hmm.
start thinking about what they see and beginning to point that out and then building those ideas. So, visual thinking strategies has the first 3 ideas here. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can we find? And then you and I have added the fourth one, what do you wonder? Because we always want, what ideas has this given you? So, would you be willing to let me try this with you?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll just see what comes up in your mind. So, here's this beautiful painting. It's a replica of a painting. Keith, what is going on in this picture?
What I see is there's definitely a lot of love going on in this picture. There's this strong emotion, and coupled by another very strong emotion, which looks like kind of a hate or a disdain or a jealousy, and then a connection between these big emotions.
So, you're saying that you see 2 strong emotions in this picture. On the right, you see representation, these 2 people embracing with the idea of love. And over on the left side, you see a person looking disconnected or with a kind of jealousy or hatred toward the people who are together. And you see that they're in the same picture, so there's probably a connection. What do you see that makes you say that?
Well, it's just that it's these two figures that are embracing the man with this large coat and the woman who is embracing him. Maybe he has just arrived or he is about to leave for some sort of a journey, but definitely a lot of affection there. And then yes, over on the left-hand side, you have this woman who doesn't seem too happy about this situation, and that's where the jealousy or even the hatred might come into play. And then with the spiraling branches of this tree, you see a definite connection between these two polar opposites.
So, what I hear you say is that you see these spirals in the middle of the tree, which bring these separate images together in some kind of fabric of um, interaction or connection of some
Mhm.
sort. And that ties these 2 people into perhaps having a relationship or wishing they had a relationship with each other. What more can you find?
The other thing that stands out to me are all the eyeballs in this. There's eyes in the tree, in the ground, in the coat. There is an owl or some sort of a bird who is watching, and there's this constant observation and watching of this scene unfolding.
So you see that there are eyes throughout the picture, especially in the center of the tree
Hmm.
and around the
Right.
coat of the man, and even creatures that have eyes, and that those seem to be looking and being the eyes that puts this scene together.
Right.
So, Keith, in looking at this painting, what do you wonder?
I wonder what happens next. And I also wonder what happened previously to lead up to this moment.
Okay, so some questions about what happened before and where it's going. Now, in this form of VTS in particular, there is a paraphrasing that the teacher does so that the student can actually hear the essence of what they said, and there's no judgment. So there's an acknowledgement of that person's thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And students are asked to build on or to have additional thoughts of their own, but there's no someone's right, someone's
Right.
wrong. It's just an investigation together.
Now, continuing on this link between Common Core and VAPA, one of the great things is that the Common Core standards call on so many things that the arts already do well. Careful observation, attention to evidence and artist choices. Why did you make this choice versus that choice in creating music and creating visual art and dance? And then the love of taking an artist's work seriously. And if we drill down a little bit more to this Common Core linkage, we find this tool, Webb's Depth of Knowledge, which is used to look at curriculum and objectives, standards, and assessments. And there are 4 levels here. The first level being recall and reproduction, recalling a fact, some information, or some sort of a procedure.
And the next level is a little bit deeper. It requires a little bit more thinking. It requires 2 or more steps, and it really engages mental processes beyond just the habitual or first response into more information, more investigating, more concepts, more seeing at layers.
And then we kick it up another level to strategic thinking. So looking at reasoning and developing of a plan, a sequence of steps, more complexity and a higher level of thinking than the previous 2 levels.
And level 4, extended thinking, encourages the thinking to go on beyond the moment of discussion. So it's an extended period of time in which you are thinking and revisiting the ideas or the essence of whatever it is you are placing your attention on. So it requires investigation, complex reasoning, planning, developing, and as I say, over a more extended and maybe getting new ahas about your thinking.
Now, if we look more specifically at Webb's depth of knowledge here at the 4 different levels, and then we also consider the 5 VAPA strands, Susan, what connections can you make between the VAPA strands and the different levels of DOK?
Oh, it's very easy and very straightforward to make connections here. So let me just give you a few thoughts that I have. Artistic perception, which is standard 1, I would go with the level 1 ideas like identify, define, responding to the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why. Those are just kind of first level thinking. When we get to a creative expression, we not only encompass level 1, but we have 2 and 4. So level 1, I might choose words like recall, arrange, illustrate. And at the level 2 level, it would be interpret, construct, show your ideas. And level 4, you'll notice create is at the highest level of thinking. So design, synthesizing, combining your ideas are important. Now with historical and cultural context, I would focus more on level 2, 3, and 4. Level 2, identifying patterns, making observations, comparing, contrasting. And at level 3, investigate, cite evidence for your ideas if you're comparing cultures or you're comparing historical events, and draw conclusions. And level 4 now, we really move into the critical thinking aspects of analyzing, connecting, applying concepts. Aesthetic valuing would be 2, 3, and 4. A little bit more of the left brain thinking here. Infer, use concept cues, distinguish, find the differences. Level 3, explain phenomena in terms of concepts. And level 4, analyze, critique, and synthesize. And finally, connections, relationships, and applications really could be all levels, but I'll focus a little bit more on level 2 and 4. Level 2, cause and effect. Interpret. Level 4, make connections. That's so important. Apply the concepts that are common between what you're studying. And synthesizing, bringing the pieces together so they're not just in separate little containers, but you see a bigger picture, a bigger idea.
Now, Webb's depth of knowledge can be a very valuable tool when you're seeking higher level of thinking with your students. It depends on how you frame your questions and your tasks when giving them to your students. If you ask your students to identify, they're going to identify. But if you ask them to critique, then you're going to get them to think a little bit higher. Now, Susan, in your experience, what support do you feel that teachers need to be more confident in integrating the arts?
Well, I think from my observations, which are over many decades now, that teachers need some tools and some experiences and some good modeling. Because a good teacher is very intuitive, very observant. They know how to teach. What they don't necessarily have are the skills and the content knowledge, which we need to give them. And some of the art forms use the classroom in a different way. Like when I teach dance and movement, the desks, we can use our movements beside our desks, but normally I like a freer space. You've got to know how to handle students in a free space. So you would need some ground rules, for example. But I'd like to use an example of a teacher who was an excellent, very inspired English teacher in middle school. And she got involved with the arts, and in fact, she got involved with TCAP, the California Arts Project. And after taking a visual arts course, she got very excited by the idea of setting up still lifes for her English students as an exercise to start one day a week. So one day a week, I think it was Friday, she built and created still lifes just with things that they had in the classroom, sometimes bringing things from outside. And then every person around the table was to draw what they saw from the point of view that they had in their chair, the still life. But she also went that other mile. She gave them some drawing skills. They learned about line. They learned about shading. They learned about how to create three-dimensionality, how to give a sense of perspective. Mm-hmm. And then the students shared what they had drawn, and they saw that on one side of the table, there were things that weren't even seen by the other side of the table that were in the still life. Or that when you looked at something from the side, it was much different than looking at it straight on. Or maybe you only saw a sliver. So it related to the points of view of people in a story, how each character is looking and reacting and telling the story from where they are within the aspects of the story. And she made a wonderful and beautiful connection with perspectives and point of view.
Thanks for that example. That's a great teacher.
But she was made greater by getting some art skills.
Mm-hmm.
So her students got more satisfaction and more skill and ability.
And this concludes our Section 2 webinar. We will see you in Sections 3 and 4.